Okay, so in the first video of this series, I was having problems not crying, which my daughter has often complained of, or not complained of, but noted as being a bit of a difficulty that I have in reading The Lord of the Rings, also certain other works. And I make no apology for it. It's just a little bit hard for the audience to handle at times. My daughter would always say, "Papa, don't cry." "Don't be sad," she would say. And I would say, I'm not sad. It's just beautiful. So now I'm struggling with this kind of dry cough. We'll see how this goes. So what I want to establish is the character of Bombadil as eldest and fatherless, Yarwain Ben Adar, as Elrond says. So, again, within the legendarium, the likely answer of what could be such a being as this, in early criticism, okay, in the 70s, folks were writing that this seemed like Jesus, because that's what they had to go by. And Tolkien responds to some folks who wrote him letters, asking about that. No, that's not what it is. But what does fit, what within the legendarium this can be, is not one of so exalted status and also not present in the legendarium as Jesus, but a Maya. So in the Ainu Lindale, which is the first part of the published Silmarillion, we have a list of various beings who entered into the world created through their music. And some liked it and stayed there. And Bombadil would be a good candidate for one of the not of the highest order of these angelic beings, but so not a Vala, but in the next class down, in which the most famous members, the most well-known members from the legendarium are Sauron, Saruman, Gandalf, also Radagast. I guess Radagast is now famous, famously bird-limed from The Hobbit. Sigh. So, "What are you, Master?" says Frodo. Don't you know my name?" "That's the only answer. Tell me, who are you, alone, yourself, and nameless?" The metaphysics of this, and the metaphysical epistemology of this passage are quite fascinating and worthy of discussion. But I want to move to the second passage that I read to kind of confirm some of the guesswork, because I don't believe I can't recall a firm statement on Tolkien's part that Tom Bombadil is a Maya, or is one of the Maiar, if you want to put it that way. So Gandalf is established as being that. Olorin is was a Maya who was associated with Yavanna, and now as I'm thinking, I'm not sure that that's right, but he's, so to speak, a named character in the Silmarillion, in the Ainu Lindale. So, Elrond, talking about Bombadil in the Council of Elrond. And I talked in the last video about parallel structures in The Lord of the Rings, and here's one that I want to emphasize. I read these sort of larger passages, longer passages. Now I want to concentrate on two short passages. Here's one. That was not then his name. Yarwin Ben-Adar, we called him, oldest and fatherless. But many another name he has since been given by other folk. Forn by the dwarves, Orald by northern men, and other names beside. Now, that's in the Council of Elrond. Now we turn to the window on the west. Faramir, talking about Gandalf. Many are my names in many countries, he said. Mithrandir among the elves, Tharkun to the dwarves. Orald I was in my youth in the west that is forgotten. In the south, in Chanus, in the north, Gandalf. To the east I go not. Okay, it's not that they have the same name, because they're not the same person. They have different names. But this is a mighty long list of names. And there are some interesting parallels between them. So, Forn by the dwarves. Tharkun to the dwarves. In the north, Gandalf. Orald by northern men. Okay, so these two speeches describing a character are parallel in their form. That's what I want to emphasize. Now, those people who think that Tolkien spends 3 days or 3 pages describing a tree, okay, will probably respond to my indication of these as being a peculiar parallel. Such critics will say, oh, but he always gives people lots of names, and they always have lots of different names. I mean, think of Aragorn. He's also called Strider, but then he's also called, Strider, but in Quenya, and he's also called this and that, and he's the elf stone, and so on and so on. And that is true, that Aragorn does have a lot of names, but not all in one place. Okay, so there's no place in The Lord of the Rings where somebody says, Aragorn, who's called in the north this, who's called by the dwarves this, who's the elves call him this, and these people call him this, and this is where he goes, and this is where he doesn't go. It doesn't happen. There were 2 characters in The Lord of the Rings who are described in this kind of list. One is Bombadil, and one is Gandalf. Okay? And Tolkien is a very, very careful writer. And just as a side note, there is no 3-page description of a tree in The Lord of the Rings. None. Okay? You're barely even going to get a 3-sentence description of a tree, of any one tree in The Lord of the Rings. There are passages that involve trees that go on for a while. But this sort of urban legend that has developed around Tolkien's writing is, not to put too fine a point on it, a bunch of bullshit. Tolkien is actually a very sparing writer most of the time in terms of description, sometimes frustratingly so. But in this particular instance, we have a situation of a very careful and intentional forging of a parallel between these characters. We've got the lore master, Elrond, delineating these names of the character Bombadil. And we have the lore master, and here again, it's one of these parallels between Elrond and Faramir. And Faramir has this sort of esoteric knowledge of Mithrandir's names. And there's a point to it. There's a reason for it. These two characters are similar characters. And what's the similarity? They have supernatural power. And in the Legendarium, what does that mean? That means that they are beings from outside the world. Just as Sauron, the Dark Lord, Bombadil says, came from outside, so he came from outside. He doesn't say it. He doesn't say it. But he's been there from the beginning. And within the Legendarium, what that means is that he is of that class, of that same class. But he was there first. He said, wow, he was really attracted to it. He heard the singing, and then he saw the thing, and he went to it. That's my interpretation. That's my guess. Okay? But my guess is based especially upon these passages. Now, let's also see that in the very passage where Gandalf is leaving Middle-earth with Elrond and so on and so on and so on, the whole, ship manifest of the great hearts of the fight against Sauron, take ship at the Grey Havens and off to the Undying Lands. And in this passage, there's absolutely no reason why we should or have to recall Tom Bombadil in terms of the flow of the story. Peter Jackson certainly doesn't, because, he's just nixed Bombadil altogether, along with the Scouring of the Shire. But, yeah. I mean, a lot of water under that bridge at this point. I guess that would be the Brandywine Bridge. Anyhow, Bridge of Stone Bows. So, yeah. Yet, here's Bombadil. And then it seemed to him, as in his dream in the house of Bombadil, the gray rain curtain, etc., etc. Now, again, I say, Tolkien is a careful writer. I have read other manuscript traditions, so to speak, other forms of the end of the Lord of the Rings that don't include Bombadil. But what was published did. And so somehow, when this came to the point, and furthermore, it was published for 20 years before Tolkien died. And if he had said, "Oh, that was a mistake. I didn't really intend to have Bombadil in. I don't know what came over me. I put Bombadil in there. I thought, I'll take him out." But he didn't. And there's a reason for it, because there was a reason to put him in, which is that Bombadil represents the supernatural power that stays. So at this moment of separation from Middle-earth, there's a recollection of what's being lost. Okay, so that's part of it. And part of it, too, is this, again, the association of Bombadil with this crew of immortals. And it's also, just tying the story together, going back to an episode very early in the story and connecting it with something at the end. So it creates a nice envelope. Also, Bombadil was quite a popular character who readers knew before The Lord of the Rings, if they were waiting for The Hobbit and then they got The Adventures of Tom Bombadil. There's a bit of a nod to that character. But I think really important is the enveloping, okay, structurally, but also the connection between Bombadil and this, supernatural world. And the bottom line is that, and a number of people have indicated this, that Bombadil is a Maya, and I think that is the correct interpretation within the legendarium. But again, as I said in the first video, I know of no one else who has indicated that one structural point that connects them, which is that the list of names, and I'd be very interested if someone has found an equivalent list of names for someone else. Let's have it. Let's know what it is. I've looked and looked, and these are the only two that I find that have that same robustness of description and strong parallels. So anyway, I think that's our confirmation. I don't know that we really need anything particularly more than that. But if there is more, again, be very happy to see it in the comments. And thanks for watching as long as this. And happy days.